The blood on her dress had already dried to a dark rust when Xavier Emerson spotted the crumpled figure beside the trail, half hidden in the sage brush where the summer sun beat down mercilessly on the desert floor outside Riverside, California. He pulled his mare to a stop, squinting against the glare of the afternoon heat as he dismounted, his boots hitting the dusty ground with a soft thud. The woman lay motionless, her dark hair matted with blood and dirt, her breathing so shallow he almost missed it entirely until he knelt beside her and felt the faint warmth of life still clinging to her broken body. "Madam." His voice cut through the silence, rough from days on the trail with only his thoughts for company. When she did not respond, he moved closer, checking for a pulse at her throat. It fluttered weakly beneath his calloused fingers. Her dress was torn in several places, exposing bruised skin beneath, and the marks around her wrists told him she had been bound recently. This was no accident, no simple fall from a horse. Someone had done this to her deliberately. Xavier looked around the empty landscape, searching for any sign of the people who had left her here to die. The trail stretched empty in both directions, shimmering in the heat. Whoever had done this was long gone. He turned his attention back to the woman, noting the pallor of her skin beneath the sunburn and the dried blood crusted at her temple. She needed water, needed shelter, needed medical attention that he could not provide out here in the middle of nowhere. He was reaching for his canteen when her eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glazed with pain. They were the color of honey, he noticed absently, even dulled as they were with suffering. Her cracked lips parted, and a sound emerged so faint he had to lean closer to hear it. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking on the word. "Please do not leave me here." The raw desperation in those words struck something deep in his chest. Xavier had seen plenty of suffering in his 32 years, had witnessed the cruelty that men could inflict on one another during his time as a Union soldier, and later as a ranch hand drifting from place to place. But there was something about this woman, something in her plea that reached past all the walls he had built around himself. "I am not going anywhere," he told her firmly, uncapping his canteen. "Easy now. Just small sips." He cradled her head gently, bringing the water to her lips. She drank greedily at first, and he had to pull it away to keep her from making herself sick. Her eyes found his face, trying to focus, and he saw the moment clarity returned enough for her to realize she was no longer alone. "They left me," she managed, her voice cracking. "The outlaws. They took everything and left me to die." "Well, they did not count on me coming along," Xavier said, his tone deliberately steady as he assessed her injuries. "My name is Xavier Emerson. Can you tell me yours?" "Delilah," she whispered. "Delilah Harper." "Miss Harper, I need to get you out of this sun and back to town. Can you move at all?" She tried to shift and immediately gasped in pain, her face contorting. "My ankle," she managed. "I think it is broken." Xavier nodded, having already suspected as much from the unnatural angle of her left foot. "I am going to have to carry you. It will hurt, but we do not have a choice. The nearest town is Riverside, about 3 miles back the way I came." "3 miles," she repeated, and something like despair flickered across her features. "That might as well be 300. You made it this far," he said, meeting her eyes steadily. "You can make it 3 more miles, I promise you." He did not know why he made that promise, why he felt so compelled to reassure this stranger. Perhaps it was the way she had begged him not to leave, or perhaps it was simply that he recognized the will to survive burning in her eyes despite everything she had endured. Whatever the reason, Xavier found himself committed to seeing her safely to help. As gently as he could, he lifted her into his arms. Delilah bit down hard on her lip to keep from crying out, but he felt her body go rigid with pain. "I know," he murmured. "I know it hurts. Just hold on." He managed to get her situated on his horse, climbing up behind her and keeping one arm firmly around her waist to hold her steady. She sagged against him, and he could feel the fever heat already building in her skin. How long had she been out here? A day? 2? Long enough for infection to set in, clearly. The ride back to Riverside felt interminable. Delilah drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally rousing enough to murmur confused fragments that Xavier could not quite piece together. He kept up a steady stream of reassurance, telling her they were almost there, that she was safe now, that he would not let anything happen to her. Whether she heard him or not, he could not say, but the words seemed to help keep his own rising concern at bay. It was late afternoon when they finally reached the outskirts of town. Riverside was a modest settlement that had sprung up along the Santa Ana River, serving the ranchers and farmers who had begun establishing themselves in the area over the past decade. It was 1878, and California was still finding its feet after the upheaval of the gold rush and the war. Towns like this represented a kind of tentative hope, a belief that civilization could take root even in the harsh landscape of the West. Xavier guided his horse straight to the doctor's office, a small building near the center of town marked by a hand-painted sign. He dismounted carefully, then lifted Delilah down, carrying her inside without bothering to knock. Dr. Samuel Morrison looked up from his desk, his expression shifting from annoyance at the interruption to concern as he took in the woman in Xavier's arms. "What happened?" "Found her out on the trail. She says Outlaws left her for dead. She has a broken ankle, head wound, and I think she is developing a fever." The doctor, a weathered man in his 50s with kind eyes and capable hands, immediately gestured toward the examination table. "Put her here. How long ago did this happen?" "I do not know. I found her maybe 4 hours ago. She has been drifting in and out." Dr. Morrison began his examination, his movements efficient and practiced. Xavier stood back, suddenly feeling useless now that he had delivered Delilah to proper care. He should leave, he told himself. He had done his part. She was safe now. He could get back to his own business, which was heading to the ranch outside town where he had been promised work. But he did not leave. He remained where he was, watching as the doctor cleaned her wounds and splinted her ankle, as he checked her pupils and listened to her heart. Delilah regained consciousness once during the process, crying out in pain, and Xavier found himself moving forward instinctively, taking her hand. "You are at the doctor's," he told her. "You are safe. It is going to be all right." Her fingers tightened around his with surprising strength, and her honey-colored eyes locked onto his face like he was the only solid thing in a spinning world. "Do not leave," she whispered again. "I am right here." Dr. Morrison glanced between them with raised eyebrows but said nothing as he continued his work. Finally, he stepped back, wiping his hands on a cloth. "She is in bad shape," he said bluntly. "That ankle will take weeks to heal properly, and she has a concussion. The fever worries me most. Those wounds were dirty, and I see signs of infection starting. I will do what I can, but the next few days will tell us whether she has the strength to fight it off." "Does she have family here?" Xavier asked. "Anyone who should be notified? I have never seen her before." "Miss Harper, do you have people in Riverside?" Delilah's eyes had closed again, but she managed to shake her head weakly. "I was traveling to Los Angeles," she murmured, "to meet my cousin. I took the stage coach from Santa Fe. We were held up outside town. The other passengers ran, but I could not get away fast enough. They were angry about that, about how little money they found. So they decided to make an example of me." Her voice had grown distant, as if she were recounting something that had happened to someone else. Xavier felt a surge of anger at the men who had done this, who had beaten a defenseless woman and left her in the desert to die over a few dollars. It was the kind of senseless cruelty that made him wonder sometimes if there was any justice in the world at all. "Did you see their faces?" he asked. "Could you identify them?" "No. They wore bandanas, but I heard them talking. There were 3 of them. The leader had a scar here." She touched her own cheek, just below her left eye. "I saw that much when the bandana slipped." Xavier exchanged a look with Dr. Morrison. "That sounds like the Garrett gang," the doctor said grimly. "They have been hitting stage coaches between here and San Bernardino for months now. Usually they just take the money and let people go, but they have been getting bolder lately. Someone needs to notify the sheriff. I will send word. But right now, this young lady needs rest more than she needs to answer questions. You did a good thing bringing her in, son. A few more hours out in that heat and she would not have made it." Xavier nodded, acutely aware that Delilah's hand was still clasped in his. He should let go. He should leave. Instead, he heard himself asking, where will she stay? If she does not have family here. There is a boarding house run by Mrs. Patterson. Once Miss Harper is well enough to be moved, I can arrange for her to stay there. Until then, I have a back room where she can rest. I will need to monitor her closely for the next day or 2 anyway. I can pay for her care, Xavier said, the words emerging before he had fully thought them through. And for the boarding house when the time comes. Dr. Morrison studied him with shrewd eyes. You do not even know this woman. No, Xavier agreed. But someone needs to help her, and I am the one who found her. It was not the whole truth, but it was all he could articulate. There was something else drawing him to stay, something in the way Delilah had looked at him and begged him not to leave her. He had been drifting for years, moving from place to place without real purpose beyond the next job and the next paycheck. Perhaps it was time to stop drifting, at least for a while. The doctor accepted his explanation with a nod. I will keep track of the expenses. You are a good man, Mr. Emerson. Xavier was not sure he agreed with that assessment, but he did not argue. Instead, he finally released Delilah's hand and stepped back. I will be at the boarding house myself if you need to reach me. I was supposed to report to the Riverside Ranch tomorrow for work, but I can delay that a day or 2. Go get yourself settled, Dr. Morrison said. I will take good care of her. Xavier left reluctantly, retrieving his horse and making his way to the boarding house the doctor had mentioned. Mrs. Patterson turned out to be a bustling woman in her late 40s who welcomed him warmly and showed him to a clean, simple room. He paid for a week in advance, then asked if she had space available for another guest who would be arriving in a few days. A lady, you say? Of course I have room. Is this the poor dear that Doc Morrison is treating? Word travels fast in a small town. What a terrible thing being attacked by outlaws like that. She is lucky you came along when you did. Yes, Xavier agreed quietly. Lucky. He cleaned up and changed into fresh clothes, then made his way to the saloon for dinner. The place was busy with evening customers, ranch hands and townspeople mixing freely. Xavier found a spot at the bar and ordered stew and bread, eating mechanically while his thoughts kept drifting back to the woman in the doctor's office. He should not be feeling this protective of a stranger. It was not logical, not practical. He had his own life to live, his own path to follow. But he could not shake the memory of her voice, the desperate plea in her words. Please do not leave me here. As if he represented not just rescue but something more fundamental, some promise that she would not be abandoned again. Xavier returned to the doctor's office as the sun was setting, unable to stay away. Dr. Morrison looked unsurprised to see him. She is resting, the doctor reported. Fever has gone up a bit, but that is to be expected. I gave her something for the pain. She will likely sleep through the night. "Can I see her?" The doctor hesitated, then nodded. "Just for a moment. Try not to disturb her." Xavier stepped into the back room where Delilah lay on a narrow bed, covered with a clean sheet. In the lamplight, cleaned of blood and dirt, he could see her features more clearly. She was probably in her middle 20s, with high cheekbones and a determined chin. Even in sleep, there was a tension around her eyes, as if nightmares chased her through her dreams. He stood there for a long moment, watching the rise and fall of her breathing, then quietly left. There was nothing more he could do tonight. The next morning, Xavier reported to the Riverside Ranch as planned. The foreman, a gruff man named Tom Baker, put him to work immediately. The ranch was one of the larger spreads in the area, running several hundred head of cattle across the valley. Xavier fell into the familiar rhythm of ranch work easily enough. He had done this kind of labor before, many times. It was honest work that left him too tired at the end of the day to think too much. But even exhausted, his thoughts kept returning to Delilah. Each evening after work, he rode back into town and stopped at the doctor's office to check on her progress. The first few days were touch and go as the fever raged through her system. Xavier would sit beside her bed during those visits, holding a cool cloth to her forehead or simply keeping watch while she tossed restlessly in fevered dreams. Dr. Morrison said nothing about his visits, but Xavier caught the speculative looks the older man gave him. Let him speculate. Xavier did not fully understand his own behavior, so he certainly could not explain it to anyone else. On the fourth day after he had found her, Delilah's fever finally broke. Xavier arrived that evening to find her awake and lucid for the first time since the initial rescue. She was propped up on pillows, her splinted leg elevated, and though she still looked pale and drawn, her eyes were clear and focused. "Mr. Emerson," she said as he entered, "Dr. Morrison told me you have been visiting every day. I wanted to make sure you were recovering." Xavier took off his hat, suddenly feeling awkward. In the stark light of her awareness, his attentiveness seemed harder to justify. "How are you feeling?" "Like I was beaten and left in the desert to die," she said dryly, then softened her expression. "But alive, thanks to you. The doctor said if you had not found me when you did, I would not have survived another few hours. I just happened to be riding past, and you stopped, and you brought me here, and you paid for my care." She studied him intently. Why? It was the same question he had been asking himself. Xavier moved closer, taking the chair beside her bed. "You asked me not to leave you," he said finally. "I gave you my word. Most men would have forgotten that promise as soon as they handed me over to the doctor. I am not most men." Something flickered in her expression, an emotion he could not quite name. "No," she agreed quietly. "I am beginning to understand that." They talked for a while, carefully navigating around the trauma she had endured. She told him about her life in Santa Fe, where she had been working as a schoolteacher after her parents died several years earlier. Her cousin in Los Angeles had written with an offer of a new position at a growing school there, and Delilah had seen it as a chance for a fresh start. "I saved for months to afford the stagecoach fare," she said, a note of bitterness creeping into her voice. "Everything I owned was in my traveling case. They took all of it. My clothes, my books, the little bit of money I had left, even my mother's locket." The loss in her voice struck him. "I am sorry." "It is just things," Delilah said, but her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I know that, but that locket was all I had left of her. She wore it every day of her life." Xavier found himself reaching out, covering her hand with his own. "When you are well enough, we will go back to where I found you. Maybe something was left behind. You would do that?" "Yes." She looked down at their joined hands, and he saw her swallow hard. "I do not understand you, Xavier Emerson. You show up like some kind of guardian angel, and now you are making me promises you do not have to make. What do you want from me?" It was a fair question, and one he should have an answer to. But the truth was, he did not want anything from her except to see her whole and safe. The feeling was foreign to him, this fierce protectiveness over someone he barely knew. It scared him a little if he was being honest. "I do not want anything," he said carefully. "I just want to help." Delilah studied him for a long moment, as if trying to read the truth written in his features. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, because she nodded slowly. "Then I accept your help and your kindness. Thank you." Over the following weeks, Xavier fell into a new routine. He would work at the ranch during the day, then ride into town each evening to visit Delilah. As she grew stronger, their conversations grew longer and more substantial. He learned that she loved literature, that she had dreams of writing stories of her own someday. She learned that he had fought in the war, that he had been drifting ever since, unable to settle anywhere because nowhere felt like home. "Why not?" she asked one evening as they sat together in the boarding house parlor. Dr. Morrison had cleared her to move there after 2 weeks, though she was still confined to bed or a chair most of the time while her ankle healed. "Why does nowhere feel like home?" Xavier considered the question, staring down at his coffee. "After the war, I went back to my family's farm in Missouri. But my father had died while I was gone and my mother had remarried. Her new husband did not want me around, made that clear enough. So I left. I have been moving ever since, working ranches from Texas to California. Never stayed anywhere long enough to put down roots. That sounds lonely." "It is," he admitted. "But it is also simple. No complications, no expectations, just the work and the next job. And now," Delilah asked softly, "are you still planning to keep moving?" He looked at her, at the way the lamplight caught in her dark hair, at the intelligence and warmth in her honey-colored eyes. Something had shifted between them over these weeks of daily visits. What had started as obligation or perhaps pity had transformed into something deeper, something he was almost afraid to name. "I do not know," he said honestly. "I signed on with the Riverside Ranch for 6 months. After that, I suppose I will see." "I hope you stay," she said, so quietly he almost missed it. Then, before he could respond, she changed the subject, asking about his day at the ranch. Xavier let her redirect the conversation, but her words stayed with him. "I hope you stay." The simple statement resonated through him like a bell, awakening something he had thought long dead. As October arrived and the desert heat began to ease, Delilah progressed from chair to crutches, hobbling determinedly around the boarding house with a fierce independence that Xavier both admired and worried over. She pushed herself hard, desperate to regain her strength and mobility. The splint came off after 6 weeks, and though her ankle remained weak, she could put weight on it again. "I need to find work," she told Xavier one evening as they walked slowly along Riverside's Main Street, Delilah leaning on a cane. "I cannot keep accepting your charity. It is not charity." "Then what is it?" He did not have a good answer for that. What had started as simple human decency had evolved into something neither of them had named aloud. Xavier knew he was falling in love with her, had probably been falling since the moment she first opened her eyes and begged him not to leave. But saying it out loud felt like tempting fate, like inviting disaster. "You are not ready to work yet," he said instead. "Your ankle is still healing. I can teach sitting down. In fact, I spoke with the minister's wife yesterday. They have been looking for someone to help with the children's education. Riverside does not have a proper school yet, just informal lessons a few times a week. Mrs. Roberts thinks I would be perfect for it." Xavier felt something twist in his chest. If Delilah found work here, she would stay. She would put down roots in this small town, and maybe he could do the same. Maybe, for the first time in years, he could stop running from the ghosts of his past and build something real. "That sounds good," he managed. "When would you start?" "Next week, if I feel ready. The pay will not be much, but it will be enough to cover my room and board. I will pay you back everything you have spent on me, I promise." "I do not want your money, Delilah." She stopped walking, turning to face him fully. The street was quiet in the evening light, most people already home for dinner. "Then what do you want, Xavier? You keep saying you do not want anything, but you have been at my side every day for 2 months. You cannot tell me there is not something you want from all this." Her directness caught him off guard. Xavier looked at her, at this woman who had come into his life broken and desperate, and had somehow become the center of his world. He thought about the war, about the years of drifting, about all the walls he had built to keep from feeling too much. And he thought about how easily she had slipped past every one of those defenses. "I want you to be happy," he said finally. "I want you to be safe. And I want to be the one who makes sure of both those things." Delilah's eyes widened slightly. "Xavier, I know we have not known each other long. I know this probably seems sudden, but I have never felt this way about anyone, and I think you might feel the same. Tell me if I am wrong. Tell me to leave you alone, and I will. But if there is even a chance that you care about me the way I care about you, then I need to know." For a long moment she said nothing, just looked at him with those honey-colored eyes that saw straight through him. Then slowly she reached out and took his hand. "You are not wrong," she whispered. "I do care about you, more than I probably should given everything. You saved my life, Xavier, and then you gave me a reason to want to live it." Relief flooded through him so intensely it almost hurt. Xavier lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "Then stay here, build a life in Riverside, and let me be part of it. What about your work? You said you signed on for 6 months. 6 months, 6 years, it does not matter. I will work the ranch as long as they will have me. This is as good a place as any to stop drifting, and I have reason now to stay put." Delilah smiled, and it transformed her entire face. Xavier realized he had never seen her truly smile before, not like this. The expression was radiant, full of hope and joy and something that looked very much like love. "Then I will stay," she said. "We will both stay." They continued walking, hands clasped, talking about the future in a way Xavier never had before. Delilah would teach the children. Xavier would work the ranch, maybe save enough to eventually buy some land of his own. They talked carefully around the biggest question, neither quite ready to speak it aloud yet, but it hung between them nonetheless, full of promise. The seasons turned and their relationship deepened. Xavier met Delilah almost every evening, and they would walk together or sit in the boarding house parlor, talking for hours. He learned every detail of her past, and she learned his. The walls he had maintained for so long crumbled completely in the face of her warmth and understanding. She did not judge him for his years of drifting or the darkness he sometimes carried from the war. She simply accepted him as he was. The people of Riverside noticed, of course. In a small town, nothing stayed secret for long. Mrs. Patterson took to leaving them alone in the parlor with a knowing smile. Dr. Morrison, when Xavier encountered him on the street, would ask pointedly when he planned to make an honest woman of Delilah. Even Tom Baker at the ranch made comments about Xavier being distracted by a pretty schoolteacher. Xavier let them talk. He was happy, genuinely happy, for the first time in longer than he could remember. Delilah had become the center of his world, and he spent his days counting the hours until he could see her again. It was a cold December evening when he finally gathered the courage to ask the question that had been building inside him for months. He had saved nearly all his wages, living frugally and setting aside every dollar he could. The small velvet box in his pocket had cost him a month's pay, but the simple gold ring inside felt like the most important purchase he had ever made. They were walking along the river, bundled against the chill, when Xavier stopped and turned to face Delilah. She looked beautiful in the fading light, her cheeks flushed from the cold, her eyes bright with happiness. "I have something I need to ask you," he said, his heart pounding. Delilah must have heard something in his tone because her expression shifted, becoming more serious. "All right." Xavier took both her hands in his, acutely aware of the small box pressing against his leg. "These past months with you have been the best of my life. You have given me something I thought I lost years ago. Hope. A reason to stay in one place. A future worth building. I do not have much to offer you right now except hard work and a promise to always take care of you, to always be there when you need me. But if you will have me, I swear I will spend every day trying to make you happy." He released one of her hands to pull out the box, opening it to reveal the ring. "Delilah Harper, will you marry me?" Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she was smiling. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking on the word. "Yes, Xavier, I will marry you." Relief and joy crashed over him in equal measure. Xavier slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms, holding her close. She clung to him, laughing and crying at the same time, and he thought he had never felt anything as right as this moment. They were married on a clear January morning in 1879, in the small church at the center of Riverside. Dr. Morrison gave Delilah away, and Tom Baker stood as Xavier's best man. Half the town turned out for the ceremony, which surprised Xavier until Delilah reminded him that they were a good story, the kind of romance that people love to witness and celebrate. Mrs. Patterson had prepared a wedding breakfast at the boarding house, and the celebration lasted well into the afternoon. Xavier barely tasted the food or heard the well wishes. All his attention was fixed on his bride, on the way she looked at him with such love and trust, on the gold band now circling her finger that matched his own. They had rented a small house on the outskirts of town, nothing fancy but theirs. Xavier carried Delilah over the threshold that evening, both of them giddy with happiness and nervous anticipation. They had waited, wanting their wedding night to be special, and now that it had arrived, Xavier felt almost overwhelmed by the weight of the moment. "Are you all right?" Delilah asked softly, touching his face. "I am perfect," he said, and meant it. "I just keep thinking about the day I found you, how close I came to never knowing you at all. If I had ridden past 5 minutes earlier or later, if I had taken a different trail." "But you did not," she interrupted gently. "You found me exactly when you were supposed to, and now we are here together with our whole lives ahead of us. Stop worrying about what might have been and focus on what is." She was right, as she so often was. Xavier kissed her then, pouring all his love and gratitude and wonder into the gesture. She responded with equal passion, and they lost themselves in each other, sealing their vows in the most intimate way possible. The weeks that followed were a kind of blissful dream. Xavier would wake each morning with Delilah beside him, still marveling that this was his life now. He would work at the ranch during the day, but his thoughts were always partly at home, counting down the hours until he could return to his wife. Delilah continued teaching the children, and Xavier could see how much joy it brought her to shape young minds and make a difference in their lives. They talked about the future constantly, making plans for the life they wanted to build together. Xavier had spoken with Tom Baker about eventually buying some land and starting his own small ranch. It would take years of saving, but Xavier was patient. He had something worth working toward now. In March, Delilah came to him with news that made his heart feel too big for his chest. She was with child. Their baby would arrive in the fall, a new life that they had created together. Xavier held her that night, his hand resting on her still flat belly, overwhelmed by the magnitude of it all. He was going to be a father. They were going to be a family. The months of Delilah's pregnancy passed in a haze of preparation and excitement. Xavier threw himself into making their home perfect for their coming child, building a cradle with his own hands and adding a room onto the house. Delilah sewed baby clothes and blankets, her face glowing with contentment as she worked. It was late October when Delilah's labor began. Xavier rode frantically for Dr. Morrison, who arrived quickly and took charge with his usual calm efficiency. Xavier was banished to the front room where he paced anxiously for hours, listening to Delilah's cries and feeling utterly helpless. When Dr. Morrison finally emerged, exhausted but smiling, Xavier nearly knocked him over in his haste. "Is she all right? The baby?" "Both fine." "You have a healthy son, Xavier. Congratulations." "A son." Xavier pushed past the doctor, rushing to the bedroom where Delilah lay propped against pillows, holding a small bundle wrapped in blankets. She looked up as he entered, her face weary but radiantly happy. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Xavier approached slowly, almost reverently. Delilah pulled back the blanket to reveal a tiny red face, eyes squeezed shut, one small fist waving aimlessly in the air. The baby was perfect, absolutely perfect. Xavier sank down on the edge of the bed, unable to tear his eyes away from this miracle they had created. "What should we name him?" Delilah asked. They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy but had never quite settled on anything. Now, looking at his son, Xavier thought about everything that had led to this moment. The war, the years of drifting, the day he had found Delilah broken and dying in the desert, the journey that had brought them here to this perfect moment. "James," he said finally, "after my father." "James Henry Emerson." Delilah smiled. "James, I like that. Hello, James. Welcome to the world." The baby stirred at the sound of her voice, and Xavier carefully reached out to touch the impossibly soft skin of his son's cheek. "Hello, son," he whispered. "I promise I will take care of you. I promise I will be the father you deserve." It was a vow he intended to keep with every fiber of his being. The years that followed were the happiest of Xavier's life. He watched his son grow from infant to toddler to little boy, each stage bringing new joys and challenges. James had his mother's honey-colored eyes and his father's stubborn determination, and Xavier loved him with a fierceness that sometimes scared him. When James was 3, Delilah discovered she was pregnant again. Their daughter, Emily Rose, arrived in the spring of 1883, completing their family. She was a tiny thing with dark hair like her mother, and a surprisingly loud cry that announced her presence to the world. James was fascinated by his baby sister, constantly wanting to hold her and help take care of her. Xavier had continued working at the Riverside Ranch, eventually becoming the foreman when Tom Baker retired. The promotion came with better pay, and combined with Delilah's earnings from teaching, they were finally able to start seriously saving for their own land. It was a slower process than Xavier would have liked, but he was learning patience. Good things were worth waiting for. In 1885, a plot of land came up for sale just outside Riverside, 40 acres with good grazing and a small creek running through it. Xavier and Delilah pooled every cent they had saved, and with a loan from the bank they bought it, their own land. The foundation for the legacy they wanted to build. Xavier threw himself into building up their ranch. He started small, with just a dozen head of cattle and a few horses. The work was backbreaking, especially in the early years when he was trying to balance building the ranch with his responsibilities to his family. But Delilah was beside him every step of the way, managing the household and the children while still teaching several days a week. They were a team in every sense of the word, supporting each other through the challenges and celebrating the victories together. One evening, in late summer of 1886, Xavier stood on the porch of the house he had built with his own hands, watching the sun set over their land. James was playing in the yard, chasing their dog around in circles while his laughter rang out across the property. Inside, he could hear Delilah singing softly to Emily as she put her to bed. This was his life now. This was home. The thought still amazed him sometimes, that the drifter who had once been unable to settle anywhere had found not just a place but a purpose. He had built something real here, something lasting. And it had all started with a broken woman in the desert, whispering, "Please do not leave me here." "Papa, watch this," James called, attempting some kind of elaborate jump that ended with him sprawled in the dirt, still laughing. "I saw that," Xavier called back. "Very impressive." "Did you hurt yourself?" Delilah asked, emerging onto the porch with Emily on her hip. "I am fine." James scrambled up, ready for the next adventure. Delilah shook her head fondly, then moved to stand beside Xavier, leaning into his side. He wrapped his arm around her shoulders, holding his family close. Emily grabbed at his shirt with chubby fingers, babbling something incomprehensible but clearly important. "Happy?" Delilah asked softly, looking up at him. Xavier thought about the question, about everything that word encompassed. He thought about the war and the grief and the years of searching for something he could not name. He thought about that day on the trail when he had almost ridden past, when he had come so close to missing the most important moment of his life. And he thought about everything that had come after, all the love and joy and purpose that Delilah had brought into his world. "More than I ever thought possible," he said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You gave me everything, Delilah. A home, a family, a reason to stop running. I love you more than I can ever express." "You express it just fine," she said, smiling. "Every single day in 1,000 different ways. I love you too, Xavier. Thank you for stopping that day. Thank you for not riding past." "I will never ride past," he promised. "Not then, not now, not ever." "You are stuck with me." "Good," she said firmly. "That is exactly how I want it." They stood there together as the sun finished setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. James had tired himself out and came to join them on the porch, leaning against Xavier's leg. Emily began to doze off on Delilah's shoulder. It was an ordinary moment, nothing dramatic or extraordinary about it, but it was perfect nonetheless. The years continued to pass, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the growth of their children. The ranch prospered slowly but steadily under Xavier's management. He proved to have a knack for raising horses, and the Emerson Ranch became known throughout the region for quality stock. The money was never plentiful, but it was enough. More than enough, really. They had everything that mattered. James grew into a serious boy who loved helping his father with the horses. By the time he was 10, he was a skilled rider and showed signs of inheriting Xavier's talent with animals. Emily was more interested in books, spending hours reading or listening to her mother tell stories. She wanted to be a teacher like Delilah. She announced at age 7, and nothing anyone said could sway her from that dream. Xavier and Delilah watched their children grow with a mixture of pride and bittersweet awareness of how quickly time was passing. They had built a good life together, better than either of them had dared to dream. The hardships of those early days felt distant now, almost like something that had happened to different people. It was a warm evening in September of 1891, when Delilah brought up a subject they had not discussed in years. They were sitting on the porch again, their favorite spot after the children were in bed, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "I have been thinking," Delilah said, her tone contemplative, "about the place where you found me. We never did go back there like you promised, did we?" Xavier thought back to that promise made in the doctor's office all those years ago. "No," he admitted. "We never did. Do you want to?" "I think I do," she said slowly. "Not because I want to relive what happened, but because I want to see it with new eyes. I want to stand in that place as the person I am now, not the broken woman I was then. Does that make sense?" "It does," Xavier said. He understood the need for closure, for reclaiming a place that held trauma by filling it with new meaning. "When do you want to go?" "This weekend. If you can spare the time from the ranch. For you?" "Always." They rode out early Saturday morning, just the two of them. James was old enough to look after Emily for a day, and they left him in charge with strict instructions and promises to be back before dark. The trail was familiar to Xavier now, though he had not been this far out in years. As they approached the spot where he had found Delilah 13 years earlier, he felt his chest tighten with memory. "It was right here," he said, dismounting and helping Delilah down from her horse. "You were lying there in the shade of that outcropping." Delilah walked to the spot slowly, looking around at the harsh landscape that had nearly claimed her life. The desert had not changed much. It was still brutal and unforgiving, beautiful in its starkness. She stood there for a long moment, silent, and Xavier waited patiently for her to process whatever she was feeling. "I barely remember it," she said finally. "I remember the pain and the thirst and the certainty that I was going to die. And then I remember your face appearing like a miracle. I remember asking you not to leave me, and I remember you promising you would not." She turned to face him, her eyes bright. "You kept that promise, Xavier. Every single day since then you have kept it. You have never left me, never given me reason to doubt you. Do you know how rare that is? How precious?" Xavier moved to her side, taking her hands. "You made it easy to keep. Loving you, building a life with you, it has been the greatest honor of my life." "I used to have nightmares about this place," Delilah admitted. "For years after it happened, I would dream about being back here, dying slowly while vultures circled overhead. But standing here now with you, it does not feel frightening anymore. It just feels like the place where my real life began, where our life began." She squeezed his hands. "I wanted to come back here to say thank you. To this place, to whatever force guided you down this trail that day. Everything good in my life started here, in this awful spot. My marriage, my children, my home, all of it traces back to the moment you stopped and helped a dying stranger." "You were never just a stranger to me," Xavier said. "From that first moment, you were something more. I did not have words for it then, but I knew. My life was leading me to you and you to me. This place was just where our paths finally crossed." Delilah leaned into him, and they stood together in the desert silence, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from tragedy. After a while, Delilah pulled back and looked around one more time. "I think I left something here," she said. "My mother's locket. I was wearing it when they attacked me, and I remember the chain breaking. It could be anywhere after all these years, but do you think we could look? Just for a few minutes, of course." They searched the area carefully, turning over rocks and sifting through the sandy soil. Xavier was not optimistic about finding anything after 13 years of wind and weather, but he understood why it mattered to Delilah. That locket represented her last connection to her mother, and its loss had hurt her deeply. He was about to suggest they give up when something caught his eye, a glint of metal wedged between two rocks. Xavier bent down, working it free carefully. It was tarnished, almost black, but the shape was unmistakable. A small oval locket on a broken chain. "Delilah," he called softly. "I think I found it." She rushed over, and when he held out the locket, she gasped. "That is it. Oh, Xavier, you found it." The locket was in rough shape, weathered by years of exposure, but the clasp still worked. Delilah opened it with trembling fingers to reveal two tiny photographs inside, faded but still visible. Her parents, captured in a moment of happiness long ago. Tears streamed down her face as she stared at the images. "I thought I would never see their faces again," she whispered. "I thought I had lost them forever." Xavier wrapped his arms around her, holding her while she cried. These were not tears of sadness but of relief, of something precious recovered after being lost. When she finally pulled back, she was smiling through her tears. "Can you fix the chain when we get home?" she asked. "I want to wear it again." "I will do better than that," Xavier promised. "I will buy you a new chain, a strong one that will never break, and you can wear your mother's locket for the rest of your life." "Thank you," she said, clutching the locket to her chest. "For everything. For stopping that day, for caring, for loving me, for giving me a life beyond anything I dreamed possible. Thank you, Xavier." "Thank you for asking me not to leave," he replied. "Thank you for giving me a reason to stay." They rode back to the ranch in comfortable silence, both lost in their own thoughts. The sun was setting as they arrived home, painting the sky in brilliant colors. James came running out to greet them, with Emily close behind, both full of stories about their day. Xavier helped Delilah down from her horse and pulled his children into a hug, feeling the completeness of his life settle around him like a warm blanket. That night, after the children were in bed, Xavier carefully cleaned the locket and attached it to a new gold chain he had been saving for Delilah's birthday. When he fastened it around her neck, she touched it reverently, tears shimmering in her eyes again. "Perfect," she whispered. The following years brought their own challenges and triumphs. A drought in 1893 tested the ranch's resources, but they survived through careful management and mutual support from neighboring ranchers. James turned 16 and began talking about wanting to expand the horse breeding operation, showing the same entrepreneurial spirit his father had developed. Emily started helping her mother with teaching, preparing for the day when she would take over the school herself. Xavier and Delilah grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. The passion of their early days had evolved into something even more profound, a partnership built on shared history and unwavering commitment. They knew each other completely, could communicate with a glance or a touch. They had weathered storms together and celebrated victories together. They had built not just a ranch but a legacy. In the spring of 1898, James married a girl from San Bernardino, a sweet young woman named Sarah who fit perfectly into their family. Xavier walked beside Delilah at the wedding, watching their son start his own journey, and felt the weight of time passing. They were grandparents now, he realized. The thought was both strange and wonderful. Emily continued teaching, showing no interest in marriage despite several suitors. She was content with her books and her students, and Xavier respected that. Not everyone needed the same path to happiness. He and Delilah supported both their children in following their own dreams, just as they had followed theirs. One evening in the fall of 1900, Xavier found himself back on that familiar porch, watching the sunset with Delilah beside him. They were in their 50s now, with silver threading through their hair and lines earned by years of laughter and hard work marking their faces. But when Delilah smiled at him, Xavier still saw the woman he had fallen in love with, still felt his heart quicken the same way it had all those years ago. "You ever regret it?" Delilah asked suddenly. "Stopping that day, taking on the burden of a broken stranger?" Xavier turned to look at her fully, taking in every beloved detail of her face. "Not for a single second," he said firmly. "You were never a burden, Delilah. You were a gift, the greatest gift I ever received. Stopping that day was the best decision I ever made. Even though it meant giving up your freedom, settling down instead of drifting, "I was never free when I was drifting," Xavier said. "I was lost. You gave me purpose, direction, a reason to build something lasting. You gave me a home, not just a house or a place on a map, but a real home in every sense that matters. How could I ever regret that?" Delilah leaned against him, and he wrapped his arm around her shoulders in the gesture that had become as natural as breathing over the years. "I love you," she said softly. "I loved you then, I love you now, and I will love you until my last breath." "And I love you," Xavier replied. "You are my home, Delilah. You always have been." They sat together as the stars emerged, two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances and built a life that exceeded both their wildest dreams. The ranch was quiet around them, peaceful in the gathering darkness. Inside, they could hear Emily moving about, preparing dinner. Somewhere in the distance, James was working with the horses, his laughter carrying on the evening breeze. This was their legacy. Not just the land or the house or the successful ranch, but the love they had nurtured and the family they had created. It had all started with a desperate plea in the desert and a promise made by a stranger who became the love of her life. "Please do not leave me here," and he had not. He had stayed, and in staying, had found everything he had been searching for without knowing it. The years continued their steady march. Xavier and Delilah celebrated their 25th anniversary surrounded by family and friends, a gathering that filled their house with joy and laughter. James and Sarah presented them with their third grandchild, a baby boy they named Xavier after his grandfather. Emily finally met someone who captured her heart, a lawyer from Los Angeles who appreciated her intelligence and independence. They married in a quiet ceremony that was nonetheless filled with love. As Xavier approached 60, he began to slow down, letting James take over more of the day-to-day running of the ranch. It was hard to step back from work that had defined him for so long, but his body was demanding rest in ways he could not ignore. Delilah had retired from teaching the year before, and they found themselves with time they had not had in decades. They used that time well. They traveled a bit, visiting Emily in Los Angeles and exploring parts of California they had never seen. They spent long afternoons reading together, or simply sitting in comfortable silence, enjoying each other's company. They told stories to their grandchildren, passing down the history of the family and the ranch. Xavier made sure his grandchildren knew the story of how he had found their grandmother, how love had grown from tragedy and desperation into something beautiful and enduring. On their 30th anniversary, Xavier arranged something special. He took Delilah back to the place where he had found her, the spot that had become sacred to both of them in its own way. But this time, they were not alone. James and Emily had come along and all 6 grandchildren. Xavier wanted them to see this place, to understand where their family's story had truly begun. They stood together in the desert, 3 generations connected by love and blood. Xavier told the story again, how he had been riding along this trail and had seen something in the brush. How he had found a woman left for dead, and how she had whispered, "Please do not leave me here." How he had made a promise that had changed the course of both their lives. The grandchildren listened with wide eyes, captivated by the tale. The oldest, James's son Michael, looked around the harsh landscape with new understanding. "This is where it all started," he said wonderingly. "Everything, our whole family, it started right here." "That is right," Xavier confirmed. Sometimes the most important moments in our lives come when we least expect them. Sometimes all it takes is being in the right place at the right time and having the courage to stop and help when help is needed. "And the wisdom to accept help when it is offered," Delilah added, reaching for Xavier's hand. Even after 30 years of marriage, the touch of her skin against his sent a thrill through him. I was so scared that day. Scared of dying, yes, but also scared of surviving and being alone. Your grandfather took away both those fears. He gave me life, and then he gave me a reason to live it. They spent an hour there, the whole family together in that sacred space. Xavier watched his children and grandchildren exploring, asking questions, piecing together the history that had shaped all their lives. This was his legacy, he realized. Not just the ranch or the land, but this family, these connections, this love that had rippled out from that single moment of choice. As they prepared to leave, the youngest grandchild, little Xavier, tugged on his grandfather's hand. "Grandpa, I am glad you stopped that day." Xavier smiled, ruffling the boy's hair. "Me too, son, me too." They rode back to the ranch together, a small caravan of horses and wagons carrying 3 generations. It was a scene that would have been impossible to imagine 30 years ago when Xavier was a lonely drifter and Delilah was a woman left for dead. But they had built this together, brick by brick, moment by moment, choice by choice. And it was good. As Xavier and Delilah grew older still, they found peace in the simple rhythms of their life. They had survived long enough to see their grandchildren starting families of their own, the ranch passing into capable hands, the legacy they had built continuing into the future. They had been blessed, Xavier thought often, blessed beyond measure. On a warm October evening in 1910, 32 years after Xavier had found Delilah in the desert, they sat together on their porch one last time. Xavier was 73 now, Delilah 70. They had lived full lives, rich with love and purpose. Xavier's health had been declining slowly, and they both knew their time was growing short, but they had no regrets, no wishes for things undone. They had lived well and loved deeply. "You remember that first day?" Delilah asked, her voice softer than it used to be but still full of warmth. "When you found me, I remember everything," Xavier said. "The way the sun was beating down, the color of your dress, the sound of your voice when you asked me not to leave. I remember thinking you were the bravest person I had ever met, fighting so hard to survive." "I remember your face," Delilah said. "How kind your eyes were, even though I was a stranger. I remember thinking that if I was going to die, at least I would not die alone. And then, I remember realizing I was not going to die at all, because you were there and you were not going to let me." Xavier squeezed her hand gently. "I could not have left you even if I had wanted to. Something in me recognized you, recognized that you were important, that our lives were meant to intersect. I have never believed much in fate, but I believe in us. I believe we were meant to find each other." "So do I," Delilah whispered. "And I believe we will find each other again when this life is done, because love like ours does not just end. It cannot." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars emerged, the same stars they had watched together for over 3 decades. Xavier felt profoundly grateful for every moment, every sunrise, every challenge overcome and joy celebrated. This woman beside him had given him everything worth having. She had been his salvation and his purpose, his home and his heart. "I love you, Delilah," he said, as he had said thousands of times before. "Thank you for asking me not to leave. Thank you for letting me stay." "I love you, Xavier," she replied, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Thank you for stopping. Thank you for keeping your promise. Thank you for giving me a life beyond my wildest dreams." They remained there together as the night deepened around them. 2 souls who had found each other against impossible odds and had built something beautiful that would endure long after they were gone. The ranch was quiet, peaceful. Everything they had worked for now secure in the hands of those who would come after them. Xavier felt no fear as he contemplated the end that he knew was approaching. He had lived well. He had loved deeply. He had kept his promises. And when the time came for him to take his final breath, it would be with Delilah beside him, just as it had been for all these years. They had started their journey together in a moment of desperation in the desert, and they would end it together, surrounded by the life and love they had created. The stars wheeled overhead, eternal and unchanging, bearing witness to a love story that had begun with a simple plea and a promise kept. "Please do not leave me here. I am not going anywhere." Those words had changed everything, had set in motion a chain of events that had created a family, a legacy, a testament to the power of compassion and the strength of commitment. Xavier tightened his arm around Delilah, feeling the steady beat of her heart against his side. This was home. This was love. This was everything that mattered. And as the night embraced them gently, he knew with absolute certainty that he would do it all again exactly the same way. Because stopping that day, finding her, loving her, had been the purpose of his life. She was his destiny, and he was hers, bound together by a promise made in the desert and kept through all the years that followed. Their story was not ending. It was simply evolving, moving into the next chapter where it would live on in their children and grandchildren, in the ranch they had built, in the love they had nurtured. They had created something that would outlast their physical presence, something that would echo through generations. And it had all started with a cowboy who chose to stop, a woman who begged not to be left behind, and a love that grew from desperation into something transcendent and eternal. As the night wrapped around them like a gentle blanket, Xavier and Delilah sat together in perfect contentment, two hearts beating as one, two lives so completely intertwined that it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. They had found each other in the wilderness, had chosen each other every day since, and would continue choosing each other into whatever came next. Their love was the kind that poets write about and storytellers cherish, the kind that reminds the world that sometimes, against all odds, two people can find each other and build something beautiful that lasts forever. The desert wind whispered through the sage brush, carrying with it the promise of tomorrow and the memory of yesterday, weaving past and future into the eternal present where Xavier and Delilah existed together, complete and whole and infinitely blessed. Their journey had begun with tragedy and desperation, but it had transformed into something magnificent, proving that the darkest moments can give birth to the brightest light, and that love, when nurtured with patience and commitment and unwavering devotion, can overcome any obstacle and create miracles that last for generations.